Hello everyone. Welcome to today's event, Police Tech Maximizing Benefits and Reducing Risks. There was a time, not too recent history, a lot of people's lifetimes, when someone could commit a violent crime, leave plenty of DNA evidence at the scene, and there was nothing the police could do with that evidence because the technology didn't exist at the time to analyze it and match it to a person. There was a time in sort of similar recent history around the same time frame, again in many people's lifetimes, when someone could rob a retail establishment, break in, steal everything of value, and there would be no video evidence of the crime occurring because there were no cameras in public spaces or in privately owned establishments to capture that kind of activity. These are the sort of things that the introduction of new technology can do for public safety and has done over the past decades and centuries. The current and next generation of police technology can hopefully do the same if implemented and adopted in a way that is beneficial to the greatest number of people in society. And that's what we're here to talk about today. From robots to gunshot detection technology to all the many other police technologies and technologies that we haven't even heard about yet. There's plenty of room for technology to transform public safety and law enforcement. So this is exactly what we have discussed and written about in ITIF's new report that came out this week, Police Tech Exploring the Opportunities and Fact-Checking the Criticism. It covers all of these technologies and more. It covers the hard-hitting questions, and it covers the public debate over how best to use technology to save lives and protect the public while minimizing any potential for misuse or unintended consequences. My name is Ashley Johnson, and I'm a senior policy analyst for the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation. Joining me to talk about innovation in police technology, I have Brendan Schulman, Vice President of Policy and Government Relations at Boston Dynamics, where he works with policymakers and stakeholders on policy and ethics issues relating to the integration of beneficial robots into society. And then on my left, I have Tom Chittum, Vice President of Analytics and Forensic Services at ShotSpotter, where he leads a team of experienced professionals in supporting the application of ShotSpotter's products in investigations, forensics, and litigation. In addition to our in-person audience today, I want to welcome everyone joining us via live stream online. We will be taking audience questions at the end of today's panel discussion, both from our in-person audience as well as from our online audience. So if you're watching at itif.org, YouTube, or LinkedIn, follow the link in the description to ask a question of our panelists. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and turn on notifications if that is where you're watching us. So first, I want to give both of my panelists here an opportunity to talk about what you do and how your company's work intersects with law enforcement and public safety. And I'll start with you, Tom.
Well, thank you, Ashley. So I would actually like to start by talking about the job I used to have first, rather than the job I have now. Last year, I retired from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, or the ATF. And when I retired, I was the Chief Operating Officer. I retired as the Acting Deputy Director of the agency, but I actually began as a field agent many years ago. I spent about 27 years working for the federal government. And it's not an exaggeration to say that what ATF is doing today is revolutionizing how American law enforcement fights gun crime. And I'll talk a little bit about the technology there. It's not mentioned in ITIF's report, but that's probably because it doesn't raise some of the same privacy concerns or civil liberty concerns that we'll discuss here. But ballistic imaging is allowing investigators to make connections between crime scenes or between recovered firearms and previous crimes that would have gone undetected before. When I retired last year, I came to work for ShotSpotter. If you know of ShotSpotter, it's probably for our acoustic gunshot detection. But we are more than that. The company has a precision policing platform of tools that help law enforcement make connections that they might not have made before. They would respond to crimes better and more comprehensively. And there's a lot of novel things that we're doing that I look forward to talking about. As you mentioned, I am our Vice President of Forensic Services, Analytics and Forensic Services. So I supervise ShotSpotter's Incident Review Centers, a 24/7, 365 operation where we are monitoring for, detecting, and reporting on gunfire. I oversee our forensic services. There are ways that ShotSpotter is used as evidence in the courtroom. And I also oversee analytics and some other related services. I'm looking forward to talking about those, and I appreciate you having me.
Great, thank you. And Brendan?
Great, thank you, Ashley and ITIF. A really timely conversation and topic for today. I too, like Tom, I think will start by discussing my last job. So I was in the drone industry for about a decade, working in policy and government relations to try to address the introduction of this revolutionary and highly beneficial new technology across different industries, not just law enforcement, but really everything from filmmaking to inspection, industrial applications, agriculture, and even consumer photography. And now that for the past year, have moved to ground robotics, I'm seeing a lot of similarities in terms of concerns that get raised when a new technology or more capable technology is brought into communities and used in new ways. And I see a lot of parallels between the work that I did with government stakeholders, with communities in the drone industry, as now might be applied to ground robotics, in the sense that there are concerns, some are legitimate, some are based in science fiction. But ultimately, if we talk about it, we work together and take a problem-solving approach, I think we would gain the benefits, as you put it, without risking the innovation. So this company was actually founded 30 years ago, believe it or not. I know we tend to think of high-tech, viral, dancing robot companies as sort of a startup mentality, which we very much have. But the company is actually 3 decades old. It was spun out of MIT and really set up for the research into the question of, can we figure out how to get robots to navigate to places that they can't go on wheels or treads or tracks? And really, all of that R&D is what is now developed into Spot, for example, the quadruped walking robot that can go up and down stairs, that can move over uneven terrain, and can autonomously open doors and pick up objects. And so the purpose was to create a general purpose technology, not specifically law enforcement, but much in the way that drones became very useful for public safety, for search and rescue, for dealing with hazardous situations. So too are these new forms of robots, but of course they've raised some concerns that I look forward to talking about today.
Absolutely. And building off of what you referred to, Tom, hopefully this will give you an opportunity to talk about more than just the gunshot detection technology that, of course, ShotSpotter is known for, but other forms of technology as well. So where have you seen the most change in how technology is improving public safety?
When I was an agent working cases, an investigation could be conducted by a single person, soup to nuts. I could do my own intelligence analysis. I did all of my own investigation. I prepared all of the materials that I had to turn over to the prosecution. And as time has evolved, the job has become much more complicated. It literally takes a team now to conduct an investigation. We have intelligence professionals because the tools that they have available to them are so much more powerful than what existed before. There's so much more data available. They have there's so much more information to try and wrap your arms around to organize. There is, of course, developments in forensic science that are that require specialization. But these new tools, as they come online, what you find is it requires much more specialization. People who can understand how to use these things, or who can use technology to help automate some of these processes. I mentioned that at ATF, the development of ballistic imaging has revolutionized gun investigations. So let me say a little bit more about that. Using 3D imaging and algorithms that can make connections between casings recovered at, say, one crime scene and casings at another crime scene, it expands the universe of leads that investigators have to follow, or when a gun is recovered, say, off of a felon who was carrying it illegally. In the past, that may have been the end of it, but technology now allows us to connect the casings, test fired from that firearm, to a murder that occurred a week ago, that maybe there was no obvious connection to before. And so having this sort of information available to us makes us more effective at investigating. So that was a big development, and it segues with what I do at ShotSpotter, and frankly, why I came to ShotSpotter. So I spent my entire professional life fighting gun crime. I came to the federal government when I was 19 years old. I became an agent when I was 21. I came over to ATF at 23, and this has been my professional experience. And when I saw everything that ShotSpotter was doing, I saw there was incredible potential for this technology to improve policing, save lives, and make America safer. And I wanted to be a part of that. So that's how it's evolving. That's why I am here now. It's sort of the background that informs what I do today. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Great, thanks. And then similar question for Brendan, especially with your experience with both drones and then sort of robotics, which very, very closely related. What technologies are you excited about? What technologies have you seen transforming, and how have you seen them transforming law enforcement?
Yeah, so robots are not new to law enforcement. I think we all know that robots, particularly the treaded kind, have been used to investigate and defuse potential bombs for decades. So really, robots are not new to the police. I think what's new are the capabilities of these newer systems. Spot, our robot in particular, has what we call athletic intelligence. So it has navigational capability throughout the world that's really quite a step up from the robots of the past. And that really makes things different in terms of the ability of public safety officials to get in, to go places that might be hazardous to themselves or to others, and deal with a situation that's dangerous. So for example, if you've got a situation in a facility or in a house or in a place of work, you want to send a robot in to investigate or to deal with a hazardous situation, you're going to encounter the kinds of things that a person would. You're going to have stairs, you're going to have doors, you're going to have maybe things lying on the ground. So what that new form of athleticism allows you to do with the robot is to get into the places that you couldn't otherwise get to before, and either investigate the situation, or in the case, for example, of a barricaded suspect, bring them a communications device, establish a communications pathway, or take other actions that may be warranted. So that's one aspect, really, of the new capabilities in the technology. And of course, you can add different kinds of payloads. You know, you can, if you're going into a hazmat situation, you can send the robot in with detectors to detect everything from radiation to chemical agents or to hazardous gases. And that's useful in public safety in terms of fire departments, police departments, bomb squad, and the like. So I think we're kind of seeing the emergence of that athletic capability, but also what's often referred to as the artificial intelligence. We're going to take these kinds of systems that now can transport sensors or other equipment just about anywhere and add automation to them so that you can have a robot that, for example, you could, in the past, open a door, like turn a knob and open a door with an old-fashioned robot. But it would probably take 10 to 20 minutes of talented, skilled operator time to perfectly position the actuator, grab the door, turn it, pull it. With a robot like Spot, that is all automated. You put the robot in front of the door, you tell it, go open the door, and it looks for the doorknob, grabs it, turns it, pulls the door open, sticks its foot in front of the door, it has one of those swing mechanisms, and pulls itself in before the door closes. That is a complicated maneuver for any robot to do. And Spot can do that in an automated fashion. So we're doing the kinds of things that law enforcement officers would need to otherwise do in person to deal with a hazardous situation, but we're sending a machine in rather than a person, and that's just safer.
Definitely. And question again for both of you, and I'll start with Tom again. What excites you about the future of law enforcement technology and technology for public safety?
Well, so I've laid some foundation about how law enforcement can investigate gun crimes better. But one thing that I was surprised, and I have learned a lot coming to ShotSpotter, was the rate at which gunfire is underreported. Research says about 80% or 4 out of 5 gunfire incidents go unreported to police. And law enforcement cannot address gun crime if it cannot investigate gun crime. That means 4 out of 5 shootings, police are missing an opportunity to find the person accountable for that. Worse than that, though, a lot of those shootings represent potential gunshot victims. ShotSpotter's technology, and a bit about how it works. We deploy a distributed array of acoustic sensors. We spread them out over areas that have historically suffered high rates of gun crime. And our sensors can detect and precisely locate where gunfire occurs. We have human reviewers in an incident review center, one of the things that I supervise, that are assessing characteristics of these incidents to determine whether or not they are in fact gunfire, and then publishing them to our customers, most of the time police agencies. All of that happens in 60 seconds or less. And so that does a couple of things. For one, it helps police know about gunfire that they didn't know about before. There are a lot of communities, I think, don't trust law enforcement. And so they hear gunfire and they don't see police respond. They think it's because they don't care. And it's shocking for a lot of people to think, why wouldn't someone report gunfire? But there's a number of reasons why. One, they're uncertain. They're not sure that they heard gunfire. They fear retaliation if they're seen cooperating with the police, or they believe that somebody else is going to call, nobody else does. But it starts to breed this belief that law enforcement has abandoned these communities. Well, now police can respond comprehensively, and they do a number of things when they get there. First of all, they can reassure the community that they do care, that they take it seriously. It gives them an opportunity, though, to begin an investigation to hopefully identify the person responsible for shooting. If there is a gunshot victim, they are much more likely to be found early so that they can receive life-saving aid. Police, though, even if there are no offenders on scene and there are no gunshot victims, there's still value in that ballistic evidence left behind. The casings that I mentioned before. And so having this tool that allows some comprehensive approach to collecting, analyzing, and acting on this crime gun intelligence, I think is really exciting, has a lot of potential for improving the way police investigate gun crimes. There are other uses of that information. I'll save it for the next question, but that's one of the things that really excites me.
Definitely. And then what excites you, Brendan, about the future of law enforcement?
Yeah, so I think I'm excited by the adoption curve here, and it's similar to what we saw in drones, where there was a slow uptake at first, and then as agencies learn the capabilities of the technology, there's suddenly a huge interest in adoption of it. I also am intrigued and I think was personally excited by the opportunity we have to socialize this technology. It's really remarkable how the robot that can go into a dangerous situation and help protect people there, as well as the responding officers, is also technology that people are excited about and delight in. They watch the dancing videos and they get, I think that's cool. And who hasn't been excited about robots for a very long time? Of course, we also have the science fiction movies, the TV shows that have scared people. So we have some work to do in terms of education and socialization. But I think we also have a lot of excitement out there in the world about robots specifically. And I think if we can bring together the police stakeholders, the community, civil rights stakeholders, as well as government policymakers, how can we understand and address concerns, but also get excited about what these tools are going to do for communities? I think that's just a wonderful future.
And building off of that, how have you seen, or have you seen at all, public perceptions change toward robotics over the past, let's say, 5-10 years? Have you seen more excitement? Have you seen more skepticism? More of both?
It's a little bit of a dystopian skepticism too often. I think that's driven by decades of science fiction portrayals of robots, both in film and TV. We have to understand and address where those concerns are coming from. So there's a significant amount of concern that I think is fictitious. But then there's also, I think, a substantial list of concerns that are real and that the industry and the government should address. I think the interesting thing that we sometimes think about is what can we do as a company to help address those things. We do have our own policies and a very strong ethical position that our product cannot be weaponized, can't be used to harm or intimidate a person or an animal. And we've worked with our customers to make sure they understand that, whether they're commercial and industrial customers or law enforcement. And they all get it. They understand that in this era with a lot of misunderstandings and misconceptions about robots, the last thing we want to do is have the robot in a position to hurt someone, or even perceived to be designed to hurt someone. So with respect to this kind of general purpose robot, we really want to do what we can to understand the concerns and address them both as a company and an industry, as well as a community.
Are there any misconceptions that you see pretty commonly when it comes to robots?
I think the first is that the robot is super intelligent and is out there with a motive or an intent to do something. The robot, as smart as it is at navigating the world, has no understanding of the world, no intent, no emotion. There's a movie that just came out that apparently was inspired by our videos, not the ones that are the dancing videos, but the videos in which we are pushing and hitting the robots to help develop the stabilization technology in them. And apparently there was concern that drove people to make a movie showing a robot that rebels against its owners and hurts them. So, that number one, the robot doesn't have artificial intelligence. It understands edges and objects to walk over or around, and that's it. It can't tell a spot to go get you a Coke down the hallway. It just doesn't understand. So that's number one. Number two is this weaponization issue, that the robots are just a day away from being armed and deployed in communities. It's the killer robot thing. It's the Black Mirror Metalhead episode, if you've seen that. So many responses to our videos on YouTube, you can go and take a look for yourself, are in that nature. Like, they're dancing today, but they're going to kill us tomorrow. And, as I said, we condemn that. We do not want to see our robots weaponized. We signed a letter together with 5 other industry-leading companies in this space, pledging not to do that. And I think government in general needs to figure out, particularly with respect to these general purpose robots, how do we protect against that concern, which I think is a legitimate concern.
And then, Tom, have you seen any misconceptions or shifts in public perception when it comes to your work?
Yes. So there are 3, I think, major misconceptions about ShotSpotter, or at least with our acoustic gunshot detection. The first is about our efficacy. You will occasionally see critics say that the technology doesn't work as we state that it does. ShotSpotter takes a specific approach to how we deal with our efficacy, our accuracy, our reliability. We give our customers financial incentive to report to us when we get it wrong. And independent audits show that our accuracy rate is about 97%. Occasionally someone will say, well, only a smaller percentage of your alerts resulted in recovery of evidence of a firearms incident. And there are a number of reasons why that is possibly true, because it first starts with employing the best practices, prioritizing response to these sorts of incidents where you're getting out to the scene as quickly as possible, where you're conducting a diligent search for ballistic evidence or for gunshot victims, especially casings. They can be difficult to find. They're ejected haphazardly. Some firearms, of course, don't eject casings at all. So there are reasons why you may not recover that sort of thing. However, if you look at the retention rate for our customers, if you look at the reported rates of our customer accuracy, if you talk to individual officers, you will see that it is a reliable system and that they depend on it. That's the first misconception. The second misconception is that our system somehow threatens individual privacy, that is somehow a surveillance dragnet. As a company, ShotSpotter is always concerned about these things. First of all, we take the view that this sort of technology should only be adopted with democratic approval that is informed by public information shared with the people that it's most likely to impact. It's the reason our CEO and other employees frequently appear at community meetings. It's the reason I'm happy to be here talking about this today. It's the reason that we willingly engage with the media, even when they are critics of us. The company is concerned about these things, and so we sought an independent audit of our privacy implications. New York University's law school policing project conducted an independent assessment of our privacy impact, had complete editorial control of the resulting report. That report is publicly available. You can find it on ShotSpotter's website and read about it. We adopted the recommendations from NYU, and their conclusion was that our technology posed an extremely low risk to individual privacy. That's so for a number of reasons. One, the nature of our system. Our sensors are placed very high. That helps with our efficacy in detecting gunfire, but also minimizes the risk we're likely to detect conversational voices. We have very strict policies in place about what we will release and what we won't. So we have a policy that we will resist any attempt to obtain extended audio. Our system is a gunshot detection system, not a voice surveillance system. Occasionally, we will be asked by an investigator, hey, can I obtain more audio? Recently, I had a homicide investigator ask if he could obtain extended audio through judicial process. And I said, look, our policy says that if you send me a subpoena, I will attempt to quash it. If you send me an order from a court, we will attempt to appeal it because we take it seriously. His response was, as a homicide investigator, that really frustrated him. But as a citizen, he was glad that we stuck by our policy. And the third misconception I think about our technology is that it somehow leads to over-policing. I mentioned that our system is deployed in places that have historically suffered high rates of gun crime. That's determined based on objective historical information, homicides, and reports of gunfire. So we're deployed in the places where our system is likely to do the greatest good and where these communities are suffering the most from gun violence. I love sitting on my front porch and I do not fear gunfire. I want that for everyone in America. And the idea that somehow our system jeopardizes peaceful existence, I think is unrealistic and not borne out by the facts. The reality is, because we are providing police with precise information, they can respond in a way that allows them to use greater restraint, better planning. You know, if you think about a 911 call, in the 1 out of 5 where someone does call, they're not trained in identifying gunfire. They say, I heard something that sounded like gunfire. They don't have a precise location. It was somewhere outside, which means police only have the option of responding and patrolling around looking for it, responding en masse. They don't have an audio recording that they can listen to again or share with the police so they listen themselves. ShotSpotter has all of that. It allows police to come in with a measured response to a precise place, and it allows them to do it comprehensively, to reassure the citizens in these communities that are suffering from this gun violence, that they're there to help fix it. Those are 3 major misconceptions about the technology. Hopefully that answers your question.
Definitely, thank you. And I wanted to touch on something that sort of, I think, builds on both of your answers, and we'll start with Brendan. You mentioned, you both mentioned taking concerns from community members very seriously. What are some policies do you think that would be helpful either from governments at different levels, from police departments themselves, that would be helpful to address the sort of concerns that you see popping up most frequently when it comes to your technology?
I think there's just an absence right now of any policy specifically speaking to advanced robotic technologies. And I think that absence has really caused people to take their fears and amplify them. So I think what would be really useful, either at the department level or at the city level or state level, perhaps federally in terms of guidance to state and local authorities, is some type of framework, policy framework for advanced robot use by police departments. And I think it would just cover the kinds of concerns that we've heard. We talked about weaponization. Obviously, the robots have cameras. That's how they navigate. Some of them are equipped with higher resolution cameras. If that's a payload that the customer wants to put on board the robot, they can do so. So I think something in the privacy space as well would help address concerns. And then in terms of the entry of a robot into premises, almost think of the warrant requirement or warrant exceptions that are required when a human officer enters a property. It seems to me that if you're sending the robot in instead, the same standards should apply. I've seen in the drone space these proactive, thoughtful, problem-solving bills be very successful at the state level at helping address concerns, showing that there is a framework for responsible use of these new technologies. This is not some Wild West, unregulated thing that can go anywhere, do anything to you. Even if that's already true, even if we have policies that govern police conduct in general, having something specific to robots I think is helpful, as I've seen with respect to drones. I think that could make a big difference.
Definitely. And then, Tom, similar question. You mentioned several of the things that ShotSpotter as a company does and policies that it has to address concerns. Are there any policies that you think would be beneficial from a government or police department level that would address similar concerns?
Yeah, so as part of our deployment, ShotSpotter offers our input on what we believe are best practices. It is helpful when others do something similar. So I was born and raised in West Virginia, and in my 5th grade math class, my teacher would always put up a quote of the day. I don't remember much about the math she taught, but I remember one specific quote, and it's, "Reputation is a bubble that bursts when you blow it up yourself." ShotSpotter can get out and talk about these things all at once, but what really carries a lot of weight is when other authorities get out and give thoughtful insight and analysis. And we're seeing more of that in a couple of ways. For instance, the White House, the Bureau of Justice Assistance, the Department of Justice have all recognized the value of acoustic gunshot detection. It's in part because they embrace ATF's strategy of using crime gun intelligence to investigate and address gun crime. The department, the administration has made public funding available so that law enforcement can implement this technology. But I think it's important to understand that all of the technologies we're talking about here are only tools. It is not the hammer that builds the house, it's the carpenter. And so I think there's a real premium that we have to place on the human aspect of using these tools. That means training people to use it appropriately, educating them, teaching leaders how to use it effectively, and using appropriate oversight. So there's the technical implementation of using the technology. There are also a lot of legal aspects to some of these technologies. So I didn't mention it before. One of the misconceptions about ShotSpotter's technology is that it somehow gives police a blank check to arrest anyone that's in the area of a ShotSpotter alert. And the reality is the case law doesn't bear that out. Now, this is still an emerging technology in some ways, but the case law is developing. And when we see public honest discussion of those things, I think it reduces the mysticism. It can help explain the technology. I mentioned some people think it's magic. It's not magic. It's math. It's science. It's technology harnessed for productive good. When we take approaches at educating people, we get this in a place where it's more widely understood and used. I think that that goes a long way.
Great. And then turning back over to sort of a similar question of how governments or police departments or other outside entities to get involved. One of, I know, the major barriers when it comes to a technology like advanced robotics is adoption. What are the barriers do you see to adoption, and what can sort of outside entities do, like governments or other entities do to facilitate overcoming those barriers?
I think perhaps the most important barrier is the community acceptance. We've had, I think you can go back a year or two and see that there have been some police departments that have tried to implement advanced robotics and for various reasons did not have a very welcoming reception in the community, and effectively that technology was rejected and sent back. And I think that's the kind of outcome that's not only damaging to that community, but also has chilled and deterred other agencies from adopting advanced robotics because they're concerned they're going to have the same experience. So I think that's where the industry, the thought leaders, in tech policy, the policymakers, community discussions, transparency, all these things can come together to not just facilitate a good outcome for those that are interested in adopting it, but also attracting others to the technology because they do bring amazing benefits to the communities. And it bothers me that a bad rollout somewhere has national or even international repercussions in terms of other agencies being interested in adopting the technology. We have these amazing stories. Just recently, a 3-year-old boy in Florida was rescued in a kidnapping scenario. The suspect was holding him in the car. The police sent the spot robot, to take a look inside the car, determined that he didn't have a firearm, and therefore were able to rescue him safely. Or in an armed barricaded suspect scenario, send the robot in. And in one case, we had a police agency tell us that they were going to blast the door and go in with flashbangs and guns ready. They walked the robot in and were able to see that the suspect was passed out drunk on the couch, therefore allowing them to enter peacefully and make a safe arrest. That's better for the suspect, it's better for the community, it's obviously better for the officers. That's the kind of outcome we want, but the social acceptance isn't there because the agencies and city government, local government hasn't fully engaged with the community and prepared them for the rollout, and things just get derailed. So I think that's the main answer I'd have to your question.
Definitely. And similarly, do you see any barriers to adoption? I know that you said there's been a lot of encouraging developments in gunshot detection and adoption. Are there any barriers that you still see remaining?
Well, I think some of the same things that Brendan mentions apply here, and like him, it bothers me that there is so much resistance to this. I was actually surprised by it. So it's no shock to this audience, I'm sure, that gun law can be a divisive issue. And so at ITIF, you sort of grow accustomed to being in the middle of opposing positions. When I came to ShotSpotter, it really surprised me, though, that there was any opposition at all. Who doesn't want the police to respond to a shooting that has occurred near their homes? And this misinformation, in some places falsehoods, I do think risks turning off communities to something that, in my view, is integral to any good public safety infrastructure. I think the way that we address that is by getting out, by talking about these things honestly, by showing transparency, by demonstrating effectiveness. So that, I think, is a big barrier. There are, financial barriers, dollars and people, or the resources always seem strapped. And I think you have to take sort of a big picture view of those things. If the only thing that you look at is the balance sheet, then you may overlook the incredible cost, for instance, that gun violence imposes on our communities. And so when you look at the cost to hospitals, because about half of gunshot victims are uninsured. When you look at the cost of deploying law enforcement and medical professionals, the lost prosperity in communities, the cost of gun violence is incredible. And so I don't think finances should be a barrier to implementation. I think sometimes it is because there's this small view of that without looking at the bigger picture. So those two things, misunderstanding, a potential public sentiment that's misinformed, and some view that somehow these tools are too expensive. I think it's too expensive not.
Well, we've got a lot of really great audience questions coming in from our online audience, and so I want to give plenty of time for those. So I'm going to start to wrap up our little conversation here to make time for that. So I'll leave us with sort of very general question, forward-thinking question that you can take in whatever direction you'd like. And I'll start with Brendan. How is your company and how are you personally thinking about law enforcement technology looking into the future, say 5-10 years down the road?
So I think there are two aspects to that. The first is increased performance and reliability. So we're constantly working to improve SPOT, make it even better than it already is. One example is slippery surfaces. If there's a sheet of ice, having a walking robot traverse a sheet of ice is actually a pretty hard problem in robotics. Also reliability in terms of non-intervention. This might be more applicable to industrial use cases with automatic rounds, but any improvement to the reliability and performance of the robot is also going to be useful for the public safety law enforcement customers as well. So we're relentlessly working on additional improvements. I think, in the future, would there be a smaller, lighter, more portable SPOT, less expensive? All those things come with scale and time. So whether, I don't know if it's 5 years or 10, if you're looking down 10 years down the road, I would imagine personally that there'll be additional quadruped or walking robots out there. I think a big question for us to answer is, should we do a biped, right? Should we have a humanoid, like our Atlas robot, which is just a research platform? Is there a use or role for that out there in society doing good things for people? And that's really an open question, I think, for everyone in robotics. And then there's this question of community acceptance. Can we do more in terms of design of the robot that might make it friendlier looking or friendlier seeming? That we set out to create this robot that can walk, and we're focused on performance with general applications in mind. And to some extent, the design of the robot just reflects the function we want it to perform. So the legs are jointed backwards. If you look at it carefully, it's the opposite type of joint from a human knee. That kind of makes it look a little bit more aggressive. We weren't trying to create a robot dog, but there are connotations with dogs that also seems aggressive. Could we design a robot that's either friendlier? Should we cover it in fur and really make it, go all the way in on the whole robot dog? These are just my own personal questions. I don't have any official insight into where we might go. But I think as we look a decade out, we're going to want to figure out to a larger extent, how should robots look, what form factor and finishing should they have in order to be well received in communities.
And then Tom, what are you looking forward to or thinking about 5-10 years down the line?
Well, I alluded to this earlier. So using gunshot detection to identify individual incidents of gunfire has obvious application for police. It has a patrol function. They respond to it, investigative function. They follow up, identifying victims, recovering evidence. When I was at ITIF, I thought about little else except improving the agency's ability to investigate, arrest, and prosecute firearms offenders. Now, individually, ShotSpotter alerts are useful for that. And I guess I knew too, at an aggregate level, this information is useful for making resource deployment decisions. When you're experiencing the highest rates of gunfire, it's no surprise that it's on the weekends and it's in the evenings. What I did not think about was the other potential applications of this aggregate data. For instance, using gunshot data to inform academic research, to test the efficacy, for instance, of a curfew law, measuring the implementation of it. using this sort of information in the aggregate to know not just where to deploy resources, but to deploy other resources, not police resources, community resources. So very often we see that shootings facilitate other shootings. And if we can use this information to help violence interrupters know where to go to try and cool hot tempers, we may be able to reduce gun violence in that way. It can be used to identify people that are suffering indirect trauma, right? If you're shot with a gun, very direct trauma there. A lot of the people that live in places where gunfire occurs a lot, though, are indirectly traumatized by living in this sort of environment. They don't feel like they can walk safely from their home to their school. Using the geolocated shot spotter data, we know a lot of gunfire occurs around schools. And so using this information to help inform trauma care for students living in that area, there's just a lot of potential that I think has been thus far untapped. And the other thing, and I mentioned it before, and you prompted me again, ShotSpotter isn't just gunshot detection, right? It is a tool, but there are other tools that have to be used. Some of them, like ballistic imaging, those don't belong to ShotSpotter. Others do, like our case management system. So taking all of this information, pulling it together, giving police a platform that allows them to be precise, to inform community outreach, to help community leaders and elected officials make better decisions. I think there's just a lot of potential here, and we've really only started to scratch the surface. Those are the things I'm excited about.
Great. Well, I want to thank everyone for being here today. We're going to turn the time over to some audience questions. I've got one online question that just ties in really well with what Tom was talking about. So I'm going to start there, and then if our in-person audience has any questions, I will go ahead and ask that. But you mentioned a lot of gun violence takes place near schools, and someone online asks, is there an opportunity to use technology like ShotSpotter or something similar to make schools safer?
Yeah, well, so ShotSpotter's system is deployed outdoors, and a lot of shootings occur outdoors. We do not deploy inside these places, but I do think so. I mean, one, so somebody mentioned to me, I hope that we can put ShotSpotter out of business. It was a reference to eliminating gun violence. And I said, yeah, look, I agree with you. I also want to eliminate, or at the very least reduce, gun violence, but you'll never put it out of business because in a lot of ways, it functions like a fire alarm, right? Even if gunfire does become a low frequency event around a school, it's a high consequence event. Minutes count. We need to know right away. And so I do think by having these sentinel systems that allow the authorities that are going to respond to get there quickly, to get there precisely, I think that matters. So do I think having ShotSpotter arrays spread around schools would help? Yes. I think anything that can help reduce and better address gun crime is a good thing.
All right, so if anyone from our in-person audience has a question, go ahead to raise your hand, stand up, indicate whatever way you'd like. Yes.
A quick question, Tom. Not to tie ShotSpotter to another technology sort of on the forefront, but do you foresee as drones are being used more as first responders to sort of precede law enforcement officers to incident scenes, like could you see an integration with ShotSpotter of a drone, and could that have implications for some of the statistics that you were talking about in terms of not just the efficacy in terms of detecting the gunshot, but getting a resolution to the incident?
Yeah. So when I first mentioned ATS technology and ballistic imaging, I don't know that I did a very good job of explaining the concept overall, this idea of crime gun intelligence. Ballistic imaging is one unique source, firearms tracing is another source, but there's a full universe of potential sources of information. It's only when they are used together that they are most effective. One single tool used alone can only have so much effect. ShotSpotter is a tool that works in that system. You asked about integrations, and although we do not deploy drones or cameras as part of our native system, we can integrate with other technologies like pan, tilt, zoom cameras, like drones. We are very often featured in real-time crime centers, where this layered approach to intelligence and information is helping make them more effective. With drones specifically, since you asked about that, we have seen both from an efficacy standpoint, but also a legal standpoint, that temporal proximity to events matters. The sooner you get there, the more likely you are to be able to identify gunshot victims and potential offenders, that you will be able to identify witnesses in the area who may have helpful information. So I do think that these integrations, using this entire toolbox, not just a single tool, is the most effective approach. I also appreciate that these things raise concerns, like how should we be using things like drones? And I think that's where thoughtful policy, well implemented, makes a big difference. But yes, I do think that in the future we will see greater integration across tools and platforms.
So as the former drone guy, a couple of thoughts. So drones are pretty noisy, so I think you have to do some sound filtering, but that's probably something you could work on. So some customization, but also FAA regulations prohibit operating the drone without someone keeping their eyes on it. It's called visual line of sight. And so the utility of having a drone flying around doing listening for gunshots, I think it's interesting, but would probably require, to actually be practical at scale, would really require a change from the FAA in terms of rules of how you operate a drone, because currently you need a human to keep an eye on it. There are interesting drone as a first responder initiatives around the country where the drones will go out in response to something, but that's a little bit different from having the drone there all the time listening. But I think it's a really, once the FAA figures out EV loss, I think we can get there.
I would like to clarify though, our integrations with drones is not to use the drone as a platform for the detection, but rather, as you suggest, the first responder. When the incident is detected and located, getting there quickly to identify people who may flee the scene. That's the integration that we use right now.
So in that case, there are agencies doing that today, but they're fairly limited because of the FAA at the moment.
That was the question, is to sort of deploy.
Yeah.
I do want to probe on that farther, actually, because I meant to ask you about this. When it comes to drones and robotics and officer safety, and you have touched on this, but I wanted to ask you specifically about it. When it comes to the drones and robots as first responders or other, potential use cases, what do you see as the benefits for officer safety and for, officers improving their quality of work?
Between those two technologies, they're similar but a little bit different. I think the capabilities of the drone are to mostly get an overhead view, which is a vantage point that you wouldn't otherwise be able to get unless you had a helicopter, and those cost about $800 an hour to operate if the department even has one, which is not common. So the eyes in the sky thing is huge in terms of looking for missing people. I think at last count, the company I used to work for was tracking drone rescues out there, and they were closing on 1,000 people who've been rescued in one way or another from peril thanks to a drone. I think with robotics, you're not going to have an aerial perspective, you're on the ground, but you can navigate and persistently stay somewhere for a long period of time. Drone flight maybe is 20 minutes, maybe 30. This generation of robots, 90 minutes, and then you can come back and swap batteries. So you've got different use cases for different missions. But with the ground robotics, I think the main benefit is you're keeping the human officers out of harm's way. So if it's a hazmat situation, or it's an armed barricaded suspect, or some other hazardous scenario, you're not sending a person into that situation. Drones aren't going to hand something to someone, whether it's food or a communications device. Drones are mostly outside in the air, and as I mentioned, they're loud, so they're not really the kind of device that can interact with people the way that a ground robot can. So I think there's a role for both and benefits of both technologies. And of course, you could integrate them. You could put a drone on top of a robot.
That's true. Any other questions from our in-person audience before I turn to another online question? All right, so online question. Do either of you see room for company-led or just, stakeholder-led development of regulatory frameworks that, would potentially inform Congress or inform other policy or lawmakers when looking at, different law enforcement technologies?
Absolutely. I've seen that work successfully in the drone industry. But I mean, a drone is just a flying robot, right? So that worked well. There was the Department of Transportation several years ago ran an integration pilot program, which experimented in 9 different communities with different forms of using drone technology to do all kinds of advanced operations, including the original Drone as a First Responder program in Chula Vista, California. I think that a similar approach can be taken for ground robotics, which are not as prevalent yet as the drones. And that would be a really interesting thing to do, is to have advanced technologies, advanced robotic technologies in communities, trying to figure out, where are the concerns, how do we deploy this successfully and responsibly and ethically, which is important to us. And to the extent there's a problem or a concern that isn't addressed in existing policy, what do we need to put in place that would help mitigate it? And I think that has to be informed by the community, because that's where the concerns are coming from.
Any thoughts, Tom?
Well, similar to Brendan, I think that some analogies are helpful. ShotSpotter's gunshot detection technology seems very novel. There are aspects of it that are not novel at all. This is science that existed for a long time. But the 911 system has also existed for a long time. And even though it is imprecise and imperfect, there's no suggestion that we shouldn't use it. Of course, we want authorities to know about these serious incidents. And so I think that you can look for analogies. But in some ways, some of this technology raises questions that we haven't addressed before. I do think that it takes thoughtful, informed public dialogue. I think it's helpful to run tests and use data to make sure that we are not wringing our hands unnecessarily, or at the same time leaping before we look. I think continuing to discuss these things, looking for thoughtful, objective reports like what ITIF produced, I think all of those things are going to help inform public policy, and I'm very optimistic about the future for this country.
Great. One last chance for any in-person audience questions. That's right, we've got plenty online. So I'll sort of take this as a last question, because it sort of touches on the concerns that we have mentioned throughout our discussion today, and I think this one's mostly directed at you, Tom. What is being done to alleviate potential risks of technology like gunshot detection, which any technology is capable of doing?
Yeah, well, so I think having policies, having smart people look at these things, being open and saying, I am sure we can always do it better. I think those are important. As Brendan mentioned, the technology is improving. It's improving because we are collecting vast amount of data to be able to look at how did it go right here? How did it go wrong here? And so I think analyzing that, using information, making informed decisions, I think that's important to protecting these technologies. One, so that we can continue to use them, but 2, so that we are sure they're not being misused.
Absolutely. And then I'll take one last question from our online audience, just a quick one, I think. So this one can go to either one of you. What would you say to alleviate the concerns? Actually, I think I'll start with Tom here, since you have actually touched on this in your comments. What would you say to alleviate the concerns of those who believe that an increased police presence in a community is an increased risk for people in the community?
So I don't know that there's ever been a time that it is tougher to be in law enforcement today. Frontline law enforcement officers are being assaulted and murdered for doing the job, the difficult job we ask them to do, at an alarming rate. Pundits lay complicated social issues at their feet and just try to find a news story that paints them as the heroes that I think they are. And on top of all of that, the public expects law enforcement to do its job better, faster, fairer, and with greater transparency. Now, that last part, I completely agree with. I don't think that the public should ever be able to ask more of law enforcement than law enforcement expects of itself. But to hold them to that, we have to give them the tools that they can use to be better, to be faster and fairer and more transparent. Technology, I think, is a big part of that. Responsibly used and carefully overseen, I think it makes a lot of promise for improving the way that we deal with violence in this country.
Great. Well, that's all the time that we have today. For those of you in our virtual audience, I'd like to thank you for joining us and for adding your questions to our conversation. For those of you in person, if you'd like to stick around, Brendan has one of Boston Dynamics' spot robots, if you'd like to see it in action. But that'll conclude the panel discussion for today. So again, thank you so much to Tom and Brendan. Thank you so much to our audience. It was a great discussion today.
Thank you.